Listen carefully because this message is not an accident, and if you are hearing these words right now, it may be the exact confirmation your heart has been quietly asking God for during the nights when you could not explain why someone you loved suddenly changed, why someone you trusted slowly walked away, why someone you thought would stay forever disappeared without warning. Because sometimes what feels like rejection is actually divine protection, and what feels like loss is actually God removing a weight you were never meant to carry into your future. And the truth is, there are moments in life when God begins to move people out of your story, not because you failed and not because you were not enough, but because He is preparing space for something your current environment cannot hold. And I know it hurts, because when someone leaves your life unexpectedly, your mind searches for answers and your heart keeps replaying memories, trying to understand what went wrong. But what if nothing went wrong, and what if heaven stepped in quietly behind the scenes and redirected your path before something unseen could break you later? Because sometimes God removes someone from your life for the same reason a parent pulls their child away from a road they cannot yet see danger on. And in that moment the child may cry and resist, but the parent already sees what the child does not understand yet. And in the same way, God sees conversations you never heard, intentions you never noticed, outcomes you were never meant to experience, and futures that were never designed for your destiny. And that is why the removal felt sudden, because divine protection rarely comes with an explanation first, and understanding usually arrives later, after healing begins to replace confusion. And maybe tonight you are still wondering why that friendship ended without closure, or why that relationship slowly lost its warmth, or why someone who once supported you began acting distant and cold, as if something invisible changed between you overnight. But what if God allowed that distance to grow, because staying connected would have slowly disconnected you from your purpose? Because sometimes the person you are trying to hold on to is the very person God is trying to release from your assignment, so that you can step into the next chapter without emotional chains tied to your past. And the hardest truth to accept is that not everyone who walks with you at the beginning of your journey is meant to stand with you when your calling starts to unfold. Because some people are seasonal, and seasons always change, even when our hearts wish they would stay the same. And there are people who were sent into your life to teach you strength, and people who were sent into your life to teach you boundaries, and people who were sent into your life to reveal how powerful your faith could become once you stop depending on their presence for peace. And sometimes God removes someone not to punish you, but to protect the version of you that is still growing and still learning and still becoming strong enough to carry what He is preparing to place into your hands next. And if you look back honestly, you may begin to notice that the separation started quietly long before the goodbye happened, because the conversations became shorter and the connection became weaker, and the peace you once felt around them slowly disappeared, even though you tried to ignore the warning signs, hoping things would return to how they used to be. But God rarely allows you to stay comfortable in places that are no longer aligned with your future, because comfort can become the enemy of transformation when it keeps you attached to something that cannot follow you into your next season. And maybe the reason that person left your life was not because you were losing something valuable, but because God was removing something that would have eventually delayed your breakthrough. And sometimes the removal itself is the miracle, even though it does not feel like one yet, because protection often looks painful before it becomes understandable. And there are moments when God answers your prayers not by adding something new into your life, but by quietly taking something away that your heart was too attached to release on its own. And that is why some separations feel confusing, because they are actually disguised answers to prayers you whispered months ago, asking God to guide you toward peace and clarity and purpose, even if it meant letting go of what felt familiar at the time. And maybe right now you are standing in that exact space between confusion and understanding, wondering why everything changed so suddenly. But what you cannot see yet is that heaven is already rearranging the path ahead of you in ways your present emotions cannot fully recognize yet. Because sometimes the person you are missing today was never meant to be part of the life you are stepping into tomorrow. And when God removes someone from your life, He is never taking something good away from you without preparing something greater to replace what you lost, even if the replacement has not appeared yet, and even if the silence feels heavy right now. Because God does not remove people randomly, and He does not interrupt connections without purpose, and He does not close doors unless He is protecting you from something behind them or guiding you towards something waiting ahead of them. And the truth that many people discover later is that the separation they once cried over became the turning point that led them into the peace they once prayed for. And maybe one day soon you will look back at this exact moment and realize that what felt like heartbreak was actually heaven redirecting your steps toward the life you were always meant to live, even before you understood where the path was leading you. Sparkles. There is something powerful happening in your life right now that you may not fully understand yet, because when God begins removing someone from your path, it rarely feels peaceful. At first it feels confusing, it feels unfair, it feels like something precious is being taken away from you. But what if I told you that sometimes the very thing you are grieving today is the very thing that was blocking your tomorrow, and God in His wisdom saw what you could not see and stepped in before the damage became permanent, because He loves you too much to allow you to stay connected to something that was slowly disconnecting you from your destiny. And even though your heart keeps replaying memories, even though your mind keeps asking questions, even though part of you still hopes things will go back to how they used to be, God is gently whispering to your spirit that this ending is not punishment, this ending is protection. And sometimes protection does not feel like safety in the moment. Sometimes protection feels like loss, sometimes protection feels like silence, sometimes protection feels like distance, but protection is still love even when it arrives wrapped in pain. And the truth is, there were conversations you never heard, prayers spoken about you behind closed doors, battles fought in the spiritual realm that you never saw. And while you were trying to hold everything together, God was already working behind the scenes, separating what looked comfortable from what was truly dangerous for your purpose, because He knows the weight you are called to carry. He knows the doors that are about to open. He knows the level your life is about to rise to. And not everyone who walked with you yesterday is meant to stand with you tomorrow. And that realization can feel heavy, but it is also holy, because when God removes someone, He is not creating emptiness, He is creating space, space for clarity, space for peace, space for people who will recognize your value instead of competing with it, space for relationships that strengthen your faith instead of weakening your confidence. And maybe right now you are still wondering why the connection changed, why the communication stopped, why the distance suddenly appeared without explanation. And the answer is, sometimes God allows confusion in your mind so your spirit can learn to trust Him deeper than your understanding, because faith is not built when everything makes sense. Faith is built when you choose to believe, even when nothing around you feels Stable, and this season you are walking through is not random, it is preparation, because before elevation there is always separation, before purpose there is always pruning, before breakthrough there is always a moment where God removes what cannot travel where you are going. And it may feel like you are losing someone important, but what if the truth is you are actually losing a limitation? What if what feels like rejection is actually redirection? What if what feels like abandonment is actually alignment with a future you prayed for but could never reach while carrying certain people with you? And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that not everyone who loved you was assigned to stay with you forever, because some people were part of your chapter, not part of your calling, and their presence served a purpose, but their absence now serves a greater one. And God is not taking something away from you to leave you empty, He is removing something temporary so He can bring something eternal into your life, something stronger, something healthier, something aligned with the person you are becoming, not the person you used to be. And even though your emotions may still be catching up with what God has already decided, your spirit already knows this change was necessary. Your spirit already sensed something shifting long before the distance became visible, because deep inside you felt the conversations becoming forced, you felt the peace slowly disappearing, you felt the connection losing its strength. And sometimes God allows your heart to feel uncomfortable so your soul can recognize it is time to move forward. And if you are honest, there were moments when you prayed quietly, asking God to fix what felt broken, asking Him to restore what felt fragile, asking Him to bring clarity to what felt confusing. And sometimes His answer to those prayers is not restoration, sometimes His answer is removal, because He sees what you cannot see, and He knows what you cannot know, and He understands the future waiting for you requires a different environment, a different circle, a different level of support. And the people meant for your next season will not question your growth, they will celebrate it, they will not compete with your light, they will protect it, they will not misunderstand your silence, they will respect it. And God is preparing those people for you even now, while you are still learning how to release what He has already removed from your life. And one day, very soon, you will look back at this moment not with sadness but with gratitude, because you will finally understand why certain doors closed, why certain voices faded, why certain relationships ended. And you will see clearly that what felt like loss was actually the beginning of something greater than you imagined, something stronger than you expected, something better than what you were trying so hard to hold on to. And in that moment you will realize God did not remove someone from your life to hurt you, He removed them to heal you, to protect you, to prepare you, and to position you exactly where your destiny has been waiting for you all along. There is something you need to understand right now before you keep questioning why that person suddenly became distant, why the conversations changed, why the connection that once felt unbreakable started slipping through your fingers like sand. Because what feels like rejection in the moment is often divine redirection in disguise. And the truth is, God sometimes removes someone from your life not because you were weak, not because you failed, not because you were unworthy, but because He saw something you could not see, and He heard conversations you were never meant to hear, and He recognized intentions that were hidden behind smiles and promises and loyalty that looked real on the surface but was never meant to survive the season you are entering next. And what hurts the most is that your heart keeps replaying the memories, trying to find the moment everything changed, while God is quietly whispering that nothing actually changed except your awareness of what was always there. Because sometimes He doesn't expose people to embarrass them, He exposes them to protect you. And the pain you feel right now is not the evidence that something went wrong, but the evidence that something powerful is shifting inside your life that requires different people, different strength, and a different level of peace than what you were living with before. And maybe what confuses you the most is that you prayed for this relationship, you trusted this friendship, you believed this connection was part of your destiny, and now it feels like the very thing you asked God for is the very thing He allowed to disappear. But what if the prayer you prayed was not answered the way you expected because God was answering the deeper version of your prayer that you didn't even know how to speak out loud? Because sometimes we pray for happiness but we choose people who slowly drain it. Sometimes we pray for purpose but we stay connected to people who delay it. Sometimes we pray for peace but we hold on to relationships that quietly destroy it. And God in His mercy will never allow your destiny to be permanently attached to something that was only supposed to be temporary, even if your heart begged Him to let it stay. What you are experiencing right now is not abandonment, it is alignment, and alignment almost always feels uncomfortable before it starts making sense, because when God begins repositioning your life, He does not only open new doors, He also closes the ones that looked familiar but were never meant to carry you into the future He prepared for you. And the reason it hurts so deeply is because your heart invested time and trust and hope into someone you believed would walk beside you longer than they actually could. But God measures relationships differently than we do, because He sees whether someone is assigned to your comfort or assigned to your calling, and the two are not always the same thing. There are people who are meant to celebrate your beginning but not your breakthrough, people who are meant to walk with you through confusion but not through clarity, people who are meant to support your healing but not your elevation. And when God starts preparing you for the next level of your life, He gently removes the connections that cannot survive where He is taking you, because the future He designed for you requires strength that cannot grow in environments filled with doubt, distraction, jealousy, or hidden resistance. And sometimes the silence that replaced their presence is actually the space where your confidence begins to return. You may not realize it yet, but the moment someone walked away, or the moment their attitude shifted, or the moment their loyalty started fading was the exact moment God began protecting something inside you that was too valuable to keep sharing with the wrong audience. Because not everyone who understands your story is meant to participate in your destiny, and not everyone who stood beside you in one chapter was meant to remain in the next chapter. And the sooner you accept that truth, the sooner your heart stops asking why they left and starts understanding why God allowed it to happen. What makes this season especially difficult is that part of you still wants the old version of the connection to return, the version where everything felt simple and honest and safe. But sometimes the reason God doesn't restore what you lost is because He already showed you what was hidden underneath it, and He knows bringing it back would only delay the healing He started inside your life. And even though your emotions keep asking for closure, your spirit is already moving toward clarity, whether you recognize it yet or not. There is a reason your peace began to feel stronger after the distance started. There is a reason your thinking became clearer after the conversations slowed down. There is a reason your confidence quietly started rebuilding itself after their influence faded from your daily life. And those changes are not accidents, because when God removes someone, He never leaves an empty space behind. He fills it with strength you didn't know you were missing, and awareness you didn't know you needed, and courage you didn't know you carried inside you all along. Sometimes the greatest sign that someone was not meant to stay is not the argument that ended things, but the peace that followed afterward. Because God's protection does not always look dramatic while it is happening, but it always becomes obvious when you look back and realize how much confusion disappeared once they were no longer standing so close to your future. And even though your heart still remembers what was good about them, your spirit is slowly learning what was necessary about their departure. You are not losing people randomly, you are being positioned intentionally, and the truth is there are blessings waiting ahead of you that cannot arrive while you are still holding on to relationships that belong to your past season, because every new level of purpose requires new clarity, and every new level of clarity requires releasing something that once felt permanent but was never meant to remain forever. And God is not taking something away from you to punish you, He is removing something from your path to prepare you. One day very soon you will look back at this exact moment that feels confusing and painful and unfinished, and you will realize it was actually the turning point where your life quietly began changing in the direction you had been praying for all along, even when you didn't recognize it yet. And when that understanding finally reaches your heart, you will stop asking why they left and start thanking God that they did. Because sometimes the greatest blessing God can give you is not someone staying, but someone stepping away at exactly the right time. So if this message is reaching you right now at the exact moment you have been questioning a separation you didn't expect, or a distance you didn't choose, or a goodbye you didn't understand, take it as confirmation that what you lost was not removed to weaken you but to strengthen the path in front of you, and what feels like an ending today is quietly becoming the beginning of something stronger than you imagined, deeper than you planned, and closer to your destiny than anything you were trying to hold on to before. And if you can feel in your heart that this season is changing you in ways you cannot fully explain yet, then that is your sign that God is still working behind the scenes, even when the people you expected to stay are no longer standing beside you. Sparkles folded hands. Sometimes the most confusing season of your life is actually the clearest evidence that God is protecting your future in ways you cannot yet understand, because when someone suddenly walks away or when their attitude toward you changes without warning, it does not always mean you failed or that you were not enough. Sometimes it means heaven saw something you could not see, and God stepped in quietly to close a door that would have slowly stolen your peace, your purpose, and your confidence if it had remained open. And right now you may still be replaying conversations in your mind, wondering what you did wrong or why things changed so fast. But what if the truth is that God was answering a prayer you forgot you prayed? What if He was removing a distraction before it became destruction? What if He was clearing space in your life for something that matches your destiny instead of competing with it? Because the painful truth many people discover too late is that not everyone who walks beside you is meant to walk with you into your next season. And God knows exactly when someone's assignment in your life is complete, even when your heart is still holding on to their presence, and that is why sometimes separation feels sudden, because obedience in heaven does not wait for emotional readiness on earth. And even though you wish there had been more closure or more explanation or more understanding, you have to trust that God does not remove people randomly but intentionally and precisely with a purpose connected to your protection, your calling, and your future peace. And what hurts the most is not always losing the person but losing the version of the future you imagined with them. Yet God is not taking something good away from you without preparing something better ahead of you. He is not emptying your life without planning to refill it with something stronger, healthier, and more aligned with who you are becoming. And sometimes the silence after someone leaves is where your clarity begins to grow, because in that quiet space God finally has your full attention again. And that silence is not punishment, it is preparation. It is not rejection, it is redirection. It is not abandonment, it is alignment. because the truth is some relationships stay longer than they should simply because we are afraid of change, but God is never afraid of change when change is what saves you. And maybe right now you are still questioning why this had to happen the way it did, but one day you will look back and realize that what felt like loss was actually rescue, what felt like confusion was actually protection, what felt like heartbreak was actually divine intervention working quietly behind the scenes to keep your destiny intact. And even though your emotions are still catching up with what God has already decided, you must remember that He sees the conversations you never heard, the intentions you never noticed, and the outcomes you never imagined, and He loves you enough to step between you and what could have slowly broken your spirit if it had stayed any longer, because sometimes God removes someone not because they were bad people but because they were not the right people for the season He is leading you into next. And the hardest part of faith is trusting God when the reason is hidden, but the easiest part later becomes realizing He was right all along. And if this separation still feels heavy tonight, you need to hear this clearly in your heart that God did not remove them to punish you, He removed them to position you. He did not allow distance to appear to make your life smaller, He allowed distance to make your future clearer. And even though your emotions may still be searching for answers, your spirit already knows that something deeper is happening behind the scenes. Something sacred is shifting in your life right now. Something necessary is being rearranged in ways you cannot fully understand yet, but soon you will recognize that what left your life made room for what God promised would eventually arrive at exactly the right time. Folded hand sparkles, and when that moment comes, you will finally see that what once felt like an ending was actually the quiet beginning of something far greater than you ever expected. There is a moment in every person's life when God begins shifting things behind the scenes in ways that feel uncomfortable at first, because when He starts preparing you for something bigger, He cannot allow you to remain surrounded by what only fits the smaller version of who you used to be. And that is why sometimes people who once understood you suddenly stop recognizing you, and conversations that once felt natural suddenly feel distant and forced, and connections that once felt permanent begin to fade without explanation, not because you became difficult to love but because you are becoming different in purpose and direction. And growth always creates separation before it creates clarity. And what feels like rejection today is often the first signal that transformation has already begun quietly inside your life, because God never expands your destiny without first adjusting your environment. And sometimes that adjustment includes removing people who were comfortable with your past, but not designed for your future. And the truth is, there are relationships that feel safe only because they keep you small, and there are connections that feel familiar only because they belong to the version of you that God is asking you to outgrow. And when heaven begins moving you forward, it will never allow comfort to compete with calling, because your purpose is too important to remain surrounded by what limits your growth. And right now, even if you cannot explain why things feel different around you, there is a reason your spirit has been sensing a shift. There is a reason certain conversations no longer feel the same. There is a reason certain people feel distant even without conflict. And it is not because something is wrong with you, but because something is changing within you. Something powerful is unfolding quietly inside your life that is preparing you for doors that require a stronger version of your faith, a clearer version of your identity, and a deeper level of trust in God than you have ever had before. And sometimes the loneliness that appears during this transition season is not emptiness but evidence that God is clearing space for the right connections to enter at the right time. because when the wrong voices become quiet, the right direction becomes easier to hear. And when distractions begin to disappear, your focus begins to sharpen in ways that move you closer to the life God designed specifically for you long before you even understood what your purpose would be. And even though part of your heart still misses what used to feel normal, you must remember that normal is not always where destiny lives. Sometimes normal is simply where growth stops, and God loves you too much to leave you in a place where growth has already ended. And that is why separation often happens before elevation, because He cannot take you higher while something is still holding your spirit lower than where your calling is leading you next. And what you are experiencing right now is not random distance, it is divine positioning. It is not confusion, it is preparation. It is not loss, it is alignment happening in real time, even when you cannot yet see the full picture forming ahead of you. And one day very soon you will realize that the silence you feared was actually protection, and the distance you questioned was actually direction, and the ending you resisted was actually the beginning of a season where God starts placing the right people in your life who understand your assignment instead of competing with it, support your growth instead of slowing it down, and recognize your value without requiring you to shrink who you are just to keep them comfortable. Because when God removes someone from your path, He is never creating emptiness, He is creating availability for something better prepared, better timed, and better aligned with the future He is already arranging for you right now, even if you cannot fully see it yet. And the truth is, heaven never subtracts without planning to multiply something stronger in your life at exactly the moment you are ready to receive it. There is a moment in every divine transition when you suddenly begin to notice that the silence around you is no longer empty but sacred, no longer painful but purposeful, because what once felt like abandonment slowly starts revealing itself as protection, and what once looked like rejection begins transforming into redirection. And even though your heart still remembers the conversations, the laughter, the promises, and the expectations you once built around that person, your spirit quietly starts recognizing that God was not removing love from your life but removing confusion from your destiny. Because sometimes the greatest act of mercy God performs is not giving you what you begged Him to restore, but gently closing the door you kept trying to reopen. And while you were asking Him to fix the relationship, He was actually fixing your vision so you could finally see what He had been protecting you from all along. And this is why the separation felt so sudden, so unexpected, and so deeply emotional. Because when God steps in to rewrite a chapter, He does not always warn you in advance. He simply begins shifting people, shifting timing, shifting opportunities, and shifting environments until one day you wake up and realize that what once controlled your emotions no longer controls your direction, and that realization is not weakness but growth, not loss but elevation. Not punishment but preparation for the next assignment He is trusting you to walk into. Door sparkles because there are blessings that cannot enter your life while certain people are still standing in the doorway. There are miracles that cannot unfold while your attention is still tied to yesterday's attachments, and there are doors that cannot open until you stop knocking on the ones God already closed. Which is why this season may feel confusing right now, but it is actually a sacred transition period where heaven is reorganizing your connections, aligning your steps, and preparing your heart for relationships that will strengthen your faith instead of draining your peace, support your calling instead of distracting your focus, and walk beside you with purpose instead of pulling you backward into cycles you already outgrew. And even though part of you still wonders why things ended the way they did, There is another part of you beginning to feel a quiet strength rising inside your spirit telling you that this separation was not random but intentional, not cruel but compassionate, not the end of something meaningful but the beginning of something greater that required space to grow, because God sometimes removes the familiar so He can introduce the faithful. He sometimes removes the comfortable so He can reveal the calling, and He sometimes removes the person you thought you needed so He can show you the strength He already placed inside you long before they ever entered your story. Sunrise folded hands. And as you continue walking forward through this season, you will slowly begin to notice that your peace is returning in places where anxiety once lived. Your confidence is returning in places where doubt once whispered, and your clarity is returning in places where confusion once surrounded you. And that is how you know God is not taking something from you but building something within you that cannot be shaken by disappointment, cannot be delayed by rejection, and cannot be destroyed by temporary separation. Because what God is preparing for you next will not require you to shrink your spirit, silence your purpose, or question your worth. Instead, it will confirm everything He has been teaching you during this quiet but powerful transformation season. And one day very soon you will look back at this moment and realize that what you once called heartbreak was actually divine alignment happening behind the scenes while heaven was clearing the path in front of you so you could finally step into the future that had your name written on it long before this person ever entered your life. What if the silence you're experiencing right now is not rejection but protection? What if the distance that suddenly appeared between you and someone you once trusted is not abandonment but alignment? Because there comes a moment in every destiny story when God quietly steps in and begins separating you from what you thought you needed so He can introduce you to what He always planned. And even though it feels confusing and painful and maybe even unfair, you must understand that God never removes someone without a reason that is bigger than your understanding and stronger than your emotions, because sometimes the very person you were trying to hold on to was the very person blocking the door God was trying to open for you, and that's why things began to change without warning. Conversations became shorter, energy became different, the connection started fading, not because you failed but because your season shifted. And when your season shifts, your circle must shift too, because God will never allow you to carry yesterday's people into tomorrow's promise if they are not designed to survive the environment of your destiny. And maybe you kept praying for the relationship to stay the same while God kept answering your prayer by slowly changing it, because sometimes His protection does not look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like distance, sometimes it looks like confusion, sometimes it even looks like loss. But what you call loss God calls preparation, what you call heartbreak God calls redirection, and what you call an ending God calls positioning, because He knows what you cannot see yet and He knows who cannot go where you are about to go. And there are moments when God removes someone not because they were completely bad but because they were no longer right for where He is taking you next. And that realization is painful because your heart remembers the good memories even while your spirit senses the necessary change, but the truth is your destiny requires space and God will never allow the wrong presence to occupy the place meant for the right purpose. And maybe that person once helped you grow, maybe they once supported you when nobody else did, maybe they once made you feel understood and strong and seen, but seasons change and assignments end and God does not allow temporary assignments to become permanent distractions. And that is why the connection began to feel heavy instead of peaceful, confusing instead of clear, draining instead of strengthening, because your spirit was already stepping into a new level even while your emotions were still holding on to the old one, and God sometimes removes people quietly so that you can learn to trust Him loudly, because when the noise of familiar voices disappears you begin to hear His direction more clearly than ever before. And the loneliness you feel right now is not emptiness but sacred space being created for something greater that is already on its way to you, and you must understand that God never subtracts without planning to multiply. He never closes a door without preparing a better entrance. He never removes a person without preparing a stronger connection somewhere ahead of you. And even though your heart keeps asking why things had to change this way, the truth is your future was too important to be negotiated by someone who was only meant for your past. And God saw conversations you didn't hear, intentions you didn't notice, delays you couldn't explain, and battles forming that you were never meant to fight. So He stepped in quietly and started moving pieces on the board before the damage could reach your destiny, because sometimes protection feels like confusion until the day clarity arrives and you finally realize God saved you from something you never even knew was coming. And the truth is, the removal you experienced was not punishment but positioning, not rejection but redirection. Not failure but favor working behind the scenes in a way your emotions could not yet understand, and one day you will look back at this moment and instead of asking why they left you will thank God that they did, because you will finally see what He was protecting and what He was preparing and what He was building inside you during the silence. And right now, even though it feels uncomfortable and unfamiliar and uncertain, you are standing inside one of the most powerful transitions of your life, because God is not just removing people from your path, He is removing limitations from your thinking and fear from your heart and doubt from your future, so that when the right people arrive they will meet the strongest version of you, not the version that kept shrinking to keep others comfortable. And that is why you must stop chasing what God already released and start trusting what God is already arranging, because what is meant for you will never require you to beg for space in your own destiny, and what is meant for you will never make you question your value every day, and what is meant for you will never force you to stay where your spirit feels restless. Because God's plan for your life is not confusion but clarity, not pressure but peace, not struggle but purpose. And even though today still feels heavy and unanswered, you are closer than you realize to understanding why this separation had to happen and why this distance had to come and why this unexpected removal was actually the beginning of one of the greatest alignments of your entire life. Sparkles. Because the truth is, God is not just removing someone from your life, He is making room for something that will finally match your calling, your growth, your faith, and your future. Folded hands. And when that moment arrives you will realize that what once felt like heartbreak was actually heaven's way of protecting the path that was always meant for you.